Welcome, everyone, and good evening. I am very happy to welcome you all to yet another edition of the Joy Chip Reading Project book discussion. I'm your host, James Edward Mills, and today I'm very pleased to introduce this month's title, Been Outside, Adventures of Black Women, Non-Binary, and Gender Non-Conforming People in Nature. We'll be talking with our editors of this wonderful anthology, Amber Wendler and Shaz, Zamore. And I want to also welcome everyone from wherever you're zooming in from. So please, as you populate the chat, let us know where you're coming in from and also something that's bringing a little joy into your life. I'd like to, first of all, make sure that we also are going to have a fabulous discussion. And but before we get into the evening's festivities, I also want to make sure that I acknowledge that I'm screening into you tonight from Madison, Wisconsin, which is the ancestral homeland of the Ho-Chunk people, a place called for time immemorial as Day Job. So please, wherever you are in North or South America, take a moment to recognize the native people that once called where you live now home. And I'd also like to thank the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies at the University of Wisconsin Madison. They are very gracious to host this and other Joy Trip Project productions. And also I'm grateful for the financial contributions of the Schleck Family Foundation, the National Geographic Society, and the National Park Service. Those organizations provide us with the funds that allow me to offer our speakers a modest stipend to participate in our program. I think that it's really important to remember that friends don't let friends work for free. I want to introduce myself for those of you who don't know what I do. I am a freelance journalist and independent media producer based here in Madison. I have a specialty in outdoor recreation and environmental conservation with a further specialty in covering issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the management of public land. I teach an undergraduate course at the Nelson Institute called Outdoors for All. And many of the titles that we are discussing in our book group throughout this entire series are on a reading list. And this discussion and others are basically designed to allow non-students and people in the general public to come to a better understanding about the relationship of people of color and our time spending time in the outdoors through memoir and academic research. And with that, I'm very happy to introduce our guest tonight. We have the pleasure of being in the presence of our editors for our book discussion. First, we have Amber Wendler, who is a PhD candidate in biology and biological sciences at Virginia Tech University, and she earned her bachelor's in biology at Boston University. She has studied organisms and plants in Latin America and across the U.S. She's passionate about making STEM, also known as science, technology, engineering, and math, and other outdoor activities more inclusive. I'm really happy to introduce Amber to the discussion. Amber, how are you this evening?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I really have to tell you that I thoroughly enjoyed your book, and I'm really excited to talk to you about it tonight. First of all, I'm really curious, as we're going to begin our conversation, how did you and Zaz develop your relationship and your partnership to be able to put this anthology together?
Yeah, I would love to share more about that. I'm not sure if it's possible to share my video. I'm good
I
either
can do
way.
that. Hang on, let me go ahead and make that possible. So Amber, were you able to share your screen? Well, it looks like I think she might have just dropped off. So hopefully we'll be able to get her back in just a moment. But also on the call is my good friend, Dr. Carolyn Finney, who is the person who wrote the foreword to this anthology. Carolyn, go ahead and unmute your microphone and introduce yourself.
Greetings and
Okay.
salutations.
Hello. Well, and it's remarkable. I mean, especially after the period that we've experienced through the pandemic, you think that we would all be old masters at Zoom calls, but
Some of us are
there you
just
go. We're
old.
figuring it out all over again. Absolutely. Well, Carolyn, it's always good to see you. How are you this evening?
You know, you know what the long answer is, but the short answer is I'm still here.
Good, good. And I'm
Glad
counting
to be
on
here.
having you here.
And also supporting and this work that I got my copy right here that Amber and Shaz have put out. Yes, like that. So just really happy to hear about, because we haven't met actually. I know them through this, but I don't know them through this. So I'm excited to hear what they have to say.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, Amber was having some difficulty, and I think she's still logging back on
I just
now.
admitted her. I just let her back in.
Yes, you
or
did.
let them
Thank
back
you.
in, I should say.
I put you in charge because apparently I can't handle how all this is supposed to work. So, Amber, are you with us now?
Okay, awesome. So the question was how Shaz and I got connected. So we actually first met through social media, which is how I met a lot of the contributors in the book initially in summer of 2020 through Black Birders Week. So for those who don't know, this was the inaugural event, and it was sparked by a racist incident that occurred in Central Park with Black birder Christian Cooper. And a whole bunch of folks came together to support him and also bring awareness to the challenges Black people and other people of color face in the outdoors and increase representation. And I'm a graduate student at Virginia Tech, and Shaz was doing a postdoc at Virginia Tech. So we were able to connect on that as well and did a panel discussion together following that and just stayed in touch from there and became a really great duo to get this book put together and a really great community to be a part of. So I'm really fortunate that we were able to meet.
Yeah, I find it interesting because the summer of 2020 was when a lot of the work that is included in your book and also many of the conversations that we're having around the topics and issues of diversity and inclusion in public land management really started taking off. And I'm interested in knowing, whether or not you feel that this conversation would have even been possible had it not been for the incidents that prompted this kind of awakening at the time. So Christian Cooper had the incident in Central Park. George Floyd was killed just a few hours earlier on that same day. Also, the deaths of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery all happened in that summer. What do you think that those particular incidents had to do with what we ultimately are discussing when it comes to diversity and inclusion in the outdoors?
Yeah, and even in some of the stories in the books, contributors note how these incidences and experiences have shaped them and how they use the outdoors for healing during this process. And we're really seeking out a community during this time. A lot of folks in academia or in these outdoor activities may be the only Black person in their space, the only person of color in their space, or one of few. And so, definitely feeling like other people didn't understand what they were going through and wanting to connect with people. And these social media events were able to bring people together who may have not met otherwise. So some really unfortunate circumstances, but it brought a lot of people together.
And what was your work involved in at the time? I mean, you were then and are still a graduate student in biology. How was your work focused in these areas at that time?
Yeah, so my research, I study birds in Puerto Rico, looking at how the environment impacts their behavior. And outside of that, biology research. I'm very passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and tried to do different initiatives in that realm. But I was able to connect with other biologists, other ornithologists who were experiencing similar challenges, and become a good support for each other. But it was definitely a lot trying to balance, doing a PhD and other projects while co-editing this book and trying to be an active member of these communities.
And I know that you are already a very avid outdoor activity participant at the time. Do you feel that perhaps some of your own experiences had been impacted by the events at that time? And did that help to motivate your interest in writing this book? Or rather, editing the anthology that is this book?
My work at the time was affected by these events. Also, given that it was a global pandemic at the time, that had additional strain for sure. Yeah, it became very hard to focus on my work with all of this going on in the world. And I feel like some of my colleagues perhaps have a privilege of being able to ignore some of these events or not have it affect them much and go on with their work. But for me and many others, that simply wasn't possible. Have all these other identities coming into play as a Black woman, in addition to a scientist and a graduate student. And I had to delay my field work, but ultimately everything was able to come together.
And so when it came to being able to start thinking about the stories that would be included in this book, where were you finding your role models or your sources of inspiration for your own activities? Did you see people who look like you writing stories and telling the narratives that we ultimately see in Been Outside Today?
No, definitely not. I would have loved to have a book like this growing up. That was part of the inspiration. And one of the groups that we dedicated this to is the younger generation of explorers. To my knowledge, this is the first video. Hey.
Okay, that makes all the difference in the world. It's good to see your face. Thank you.
Good to see you. Good to see you. So there are some other collections that have come out at a similar time, which is wonderful, about Black people's experiences outdoors. To my knowledge, this is the first one highlighting this specific group: Black women, non-binary, gender non-conforming people in nature. Especially with Black Birders Week and seeing a lot of folks posting on social media their outdoor activities, that was really inspirational and made me realize just how many more folks were out there doing these things than I realized, for sure. And just more and more people have been messaging me and saying, "Oh, I also do these activities," and it's been so wonderful to be able to connect with folks.
No, absolutely. I mean, and also, just from the title, I know I hear every Black woman I've ever known who would say, we've been out here. And,
Yes.
So when I heard your title for the first time, I that resonated in my head. And I would imagine that you probably had a very similar experience. Was it like that when you decided to come up with this particular title for this book?
Yeah, Shaz and I were workshopping a bunch of titles. Also, some contributors were giving suggestions, and this one resonated the most for sure. And, even if the way that we've been outside looks a little different than some other people, the fact remains the same. We've been out here, we're going to continue to be out here, and we want to share all the ways in which we're doing that and get more people out here, more Black people, more people of color, gender minorities. So we really felt good about the title.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'd love to pull Dr. Finney into the conversation. She's on the call. Hopefully I've managed to correct the issue when it comes to being able to share video as well as audio. Carolyn, good to see your face. And I'm very happy to introduce you to Amber. I think it's amazing that you two have never actually met in person before.
Sorry, it was telling me that the host isn't going to let you speak. And I was like, what?
What?
Hi, Amber. It's nice to meet you. Yes.
It's so great to see you.
Yeah, you as well.
Yeah. Well, I'd love it if Carolyn, you can help to put into context some of what prompted the creation of this book in the first place. The title, Been Outside, implies that there has always been some relative history to the experience of Black people, Black women, people in particular, for having these kinds of experiences in the outdoors. Why is it only just now that we're seeing these titles come to light?
Oh Lord, how much time do we have? So the short answer, and I'm not sure there is a short one, is, I love that when you said been outside, because I always said we've always been here. In particular, if we're talking about Black people, more specifically Black women, but all kinds of people, all kinds of Black and brown people that have always been here doing our thing in the way that we do it. And, we don't operate in a vacuum. We don't live on an island. We live within a world that has constructed identities in a very particular way. We know that there's power dynamic, there's capitalism, there's colonialism, there's all the things. That's why I said there's so much that has shaped the way that many of us in our bodies have been allowed to show up, right? Have been allowed to show up, have been recognized, have been seen, and we are still, not recognized necessarily, seen, valued, elevated, promoted, understood. We can still be transacted. We can still be extracted. We still are, in these stories. And I think there's a lot at stake. We're having a big conversation in this country now about the revisionist American history, as though the idea about manifest destiny is the only history and that there's a single narrative to who we are. When we think about being in the outdoors, I think it's the same way. There's an $887 billion outdoor recreation industry. There's money at stake. There's position at stake. And I'm not saying that everybody is viciously trying to keep all Black and brown people out. Some people are. But what I'm saying is, right, that what does it mean to consider our experiences and the differences we have? We're not better and or worse than anybody else, but we do have a different set of experiences, in part because of the bodies that we inhabit in the time that we are here in this world, right? And so being able to have that more complicated and complex conversation means that for somebody else who doesn't consider themselves part of this large expanded group that, Amber, that you have gathered all these stories about, for me, it's more than talking about race or gender or geography. It's actually being able to consider a person's own complicity and culpability. What is my role in my case, if I think about what is my role in seeing somebody who's differently abled, for instance, in the great outdoors, it hasn't been my experience. I don't know what that's like. And I might not even pay attention to issues of accessibility, not because I'm a bad person, but because I actually just never had to look, right? What does that mean in terms of when I realize somebody brings it to my attention that I never had to look? So now how do I become responsible and accountable to that? And how do I change my own behavior to consider, someone else's positionality? And I think that's something a lot of people don't necessarily want to do. And if I'm more generous and empathetic, which I like to be, they don't know how to do.
Well, I really think that part of the whole conversation is around being able to have the representation, and sometimes it's hard to know that we've been out here unless we hear the stories. and being able to pull these narratives together using contemporary writers. But I especially like the fact that you're using it from the lens of STEM and science, because women, Black women in particular, have been in these fields for decades, if not centuries now. Amber, I'm really curious to know, in terms of your experience, being able to take these stories and now project them into the lives of women who can hopefully learn from and maybe even be inspired by the stories and experiences of other women, especially in the STEM field. What do you imagine this book being able to do in order to move the whole conversation forward?
I've definitely received positive feedback from other Black women, non-binary scientists, that they can relate to a lot of the stories, and that they're grateful that they have this collection and representation. And then from other folks, like allies, like saying that they learned so much and that they didn't realize that these were the experiences. But also, I think something, we have 22 stories in the book, and coming from diverse perspectives. We have people from all across the United States, as well as Canada, London, and Nigeria. So we have some differences in regionality, different ages, all the way from undergrad to tenured professor, as well as some non-academics. And even despite all this diversity, we emphasize that, we are not a monolith. These are just, 22 stories and one step on a lifetime of exploration. So, how we feel in this book may not be how some other people, other Black women, non-binary folks feel. And, that's okay. That's important. And we also compiled an extensive list of resources in the back with different organizations that folks can volunteer with, learn from, donate to, books, articles, and stuff to continue education. So we have folks that have notified me that they're reading it for their book clubs. So it sounds like, folks are taking the opportunity to continue to educate themselves and learn more through these personal stories. And, contributors, some of the stories are really emotional, and they really unveil a lot about themselves, and it's pretty powerful. I feel fortunate to have gotten to work with these really wonderful folks.
Well, I mean, that is really what I'm very curious to know. You mentioned that many of them, including your co-editor, you found through social media, and I would imagine that was the beginning process. But what was the overall method in order to find the 22 authors that you include in the anthology, and how did you make the selection process?
So Shaz and I have stories in there as well. So aside from us, we have 20 contributors, and we put together a little application for folks that are interested to submit, a sample writing piece. And we gave some potential topics that folks could write about, but we didn't want to restrict people too much and wanted people to, really write about what they're passionate about. And so we went through those and got back to folks, and we put this on social media, also via email. I often, when I go to events like conferences or other outdoor events, and I see, the few other Black people, I often want to go up to them and be like, oh, can I add you to the group chat? Let's connect on social media. So, it's the same here. I was able to go up to people and tell them about this and see if they're interested in joining our group. And people were excited and, happy to share their story. And we feel fortunate for that. And folks that got an honorarium for contributing, and that was the main process. And I guess what also may make it unique, as opposed to people just submitting stories and us going back and forth with edits and shaping the story, we would have virtual work sessions via Zoom where folks would get together, and it really, that was one of the best parts, just getting to connect. Sometimes we would just talk about life, not even book stuff, and that made this all. And I've been able to meet quite a few folks in person now, but it would be great to get to meet everyone in person one day.
Yeah,
Go on
it
some
seems like
outdoor
you
adventures.
were able to put together a community. I mean, to be able to have this be a communal effort. And can I assume that there are some stories that you received or were contributed that didn't make it into the anthology that might still be out there, but that didn't make the book, but would be interested in perhaps reading one day?
No, the way we did the process is we didn't have anyone submit a complete story, and then reject it. It was just a small writing sample that could be on any topic. And the stories are about 2,500 words each, so there was definitely some things that folks had to remove from stories that were too long or shifting direction. So there is some writing out there that isn't included that is still wonderful, but no full stories.
Okay. Well, and also I think that you have the ability to maybe even craft new stories. And in fact, some of the authors, especially those that are in academia, are doing research of their own anyway. How much of the work that they've done do you think could perhaps take up the pages of, perhaps another anthology within a couple of years?
That's a fun question. Thinking about a second book, and for reference, we started putting this together in fall of 2020, and so it took 3 years with everything going on. So it's definitely a process, a worthwhile process for sure. So that's definitely something we've thought about, potentially putting together another anthology, because like I noted, these are just the beginning steps on a lifetime of exploration and learning about this and whatnot. Yeah, regarding academics, that's something we've worked with folks on, is creative writing, because these are different writing style than scientific papers that you would see. It's people's personal narratives. So that was definitely a fun process, and getting to do something different, and figuring out what story to tell, how you want to tell that story. So yeah, folks definitely have worthwhile things to say for sure, just how to get it on the paper.
Sure, because this is creative storytelling as opposed to, scientific research-based, very much prose writing. Did you find that you were perhaps workshopping some of these stories, or were your authors able to come up with the subject matter and the stories on their own?
Yeah, there is a range for sure, and level of stories that were put together. There were some contributors that had much more experience with creative writing, and others that were more new to it. And we wanted to make this accessible and get as many diverse stories as possible. So we didn't want to turn someone away necessarily if they didn't have as much experience. So there was quite a bit of workshopping. People would have potentially multiple ideas, or different ways in which they were telling it. So we would have different writing prompts, and in these group sessions we would talk out loud about our ideas, and I think that was really helpful for sure. And just having that flexibility and individualized process where folks can write at their own pace, more or less. We were pretty flexible with the deadlines, and just so that we can include as many stories as possible.
So, before I get on to my next question, I want to encourage everyone in the audience who have questions of their own to either hit the hand raise icon or drop your note in the chat, and hopefully as we get towards the end of our discussion, we'll be able to include comments from the audience as well. Amber, one of the things that I really loved about your book is that clearly had the one thing in common of basically being everyone was non-white, and the aspect of gender nonconformity was actually part of it as well. And I think part of what makes it such an interesting, I guess, factor in terms of the selection process of your authors as well as the subject matter of the book, is that these are people that have typically been on the margins of these kinds of stories, and have been, for decades, if not hundreds of years in this country, if not in all of human history. What do you think is going to be the ability to be able to take stories like this, and perhaps, find common themes in storytelling that we don't typically see, especially when we're talking about outdoors? Because I mean, typically that's very much adventure and conquering, and being very much putting oneself in the center of the narrative, and perhaps not including the interests of others. Can stories like these help us to perhaps redefine the genre of nature-based storytelling?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I hope so. We think that it's important to include all different types of ways that folks are engaging with the outdoors, not just, expeditions up big mountains, although, many of the contributors do enjoy that as well. But yeah, just having the outdoors as spaces of healing, spaces of connection with family and friends, walking in urban spaces, noticing the birds and other wildlife or outside through your window perhaps, and engaging with kids. But the one thing that we notice, and also we've gotten some reviews about, is that there's a lot of common threads just with everyone outside. A lot of people can relate to someone's first camping trip, and the vulnerability and perhaps some of the struggles folks experience outdoors, and the love with that. So I think that perhaps folks may realize that we all have a lot more in common than we realize.
Yeah, Carolyn, I'd love it if you could help us with that question as well. I mean, being able to, change the nature of the storyteller, how does that help us to change the nature of stories?
Well, actually, I would frame it differently. I wouldn't say to change the nature of the storyteller. I think the nature of the storyteller is just fine as it is, right? Whatever that is. I think it's more about how our ability for those of us to hear different stories, to hold different stories. There was an article written maybe a month ago in the New Yorker by Jonathan Franzen, and it says the problem of nature writing. And one of the things that Jonathan Franzen that I really appreciated was about the article. He said that, and he's a major bird watcher, and really is, I guess would call himself an environmentalist and wants to talk about climate change. But he says it's no longer good enough in nature writing just simply to write about nature. If you want people to care, if you want people to change their minds, to do something different, you actually have to include something about yourself. And I think that's so interesting for some of us, like what I was hearing Amber say, and I know I've said that when we have never seen ourselves in the story, so I'm actively putting myself in, partially because, like Toni Morrison says, I am the reader of my stories as well. And it's important to see me there, right? But Jonathan Franzen, as a white man and a well-published, is saying, you got to tell something about yourself. Like, that's going to get people to really lean into it. It's not going to be enough to talk about a particular bird species or a particular landscape. To get people to actually care is to put that human element in. So it also opens the door for many of us to come in and say, yeah, so when I tell you the story, or when Amber tells you the story of a particular place that you thought you knew, it's probably going to look and sound a little different because our individual experiences are going to be a little different. And that changes the way that we not only care about nature, but also the way we care about each other. because I think that's the ultimate story, right? Is that anyone here can tell me their story. And yes, I can come to care about what it is you're talking about, but mostly I want to be moved by, I come to care about you, right? And then that sort of strengthens our relationship as a collective. And then how we can decide what it is, whatever it is we want to do in the world, how we do that better.
I totally agree. And I'm
That's the
also,
safest thing you can say to me, right? It's, I totally agree.
well, I mean, Carol, I have yet to have you ever say anything that I don't completely agree with, but that's just because we're good friends, and I think we're one mind when it comes to those kinds of things.
One
You know,
mind.
Amber, yeah, I'm interested in also, you know, trying to get a read on how this process might have changed or transformed you. You know, because, you know, going through all of these different narratives from so many different perspectives, and I will never ask anyone, especially when you put together a collection, to pick your favorite. But were any of the stories that you read, edited, contributed to this anthology, were any of them particularly either transformative, compelling, inspiring to you that you can share with the folks in the audience, and also perhaps those who will hopefully read this book?
Yeah, that is a tough question, because I could definitely sit here and say really wonderful things about all the stories and things I've learned from each one. Got the book here. I would say one that made me pretty emotional actually closes the book, Dr. Tiara Moore's story, All I Ever Needed. So she goes through her experiences growing up and various challenges with that. I won't give too much away. And you know, being alone and wanting this community, and ultimately she founded Black and Marine Science, and it's currently Black and Marine Science Week, so definitely check that out on social media. And but ends her story with the realization that, you know, all she ever needed was was herself, and getting through some of these tough moments. And it just really, it definitely moved me. And oh, there's so many good ones. That section is growing together, so it's all about community. And starting that section, we have Dr. Samika Halsley's story about breaking cycles of trauma and about some struggles she experienced as an undergrad and fieldwork, and then, you know, in the position as a professor and mentor, how starting to see how some of those patterns are still existing, and wanting to break that. And so that's definitely something that I can relate to. And just seeing we have Sheridan Alford in the first section, How We Arrived, where she was able to go through journal entries that she had written from when she was younger and look back on them now and reflect on it. So I thought that was a really cool and unique way of sharing that story, and how nature really healed her in some times. And it is tough. Tough just
Again, don't ever want to put you on the
together.
spot and make you pick one in particular, but
Yeah.
I think that you kind of touched on something that I think, you know, Carol and I know, and we've talked about, and the I guess the nature of the outdoors in general is, you know, the question is, am I enough? You know, I mean, can I be my complete self in this space where I am being asked, you know, just by the environment to be my whole and present self? And I think that a lot of the titles and the stories that you introduce to the reader gives them an opportunity to see other people asking themselves that same question.
Yeah.
Am I enough? And I'm interested in you know, finding out from you, you know, in terms of the whole process, you know, do you feel that you've given your readers an opportunity to see enough solid examples of people struggling with this so that they can see themselves as enough in the outdoors?
Yes, that's a wonderful, wonderful thought, and I hope so. I feel that there is lots of examples with that, especially the first section, how we arrived with people, how the outdoors has shaped their identity and where they see themselves fitting, and a lot of them starting off with not being as confident or being unsure, and then coming into themselves. But one interesting thing related to this that Shaz and I noticed as we were editing stories and talking with folks is, especially as Black women and non-binary folks in these spaces in academia and the outdoors, often we are told that we're not enough, or feeling like we really have to do more than the people around us to, feel worthy. And so some folks, even if they're, 10 years in their career or in their sport or activity, still having some of those feelings of, am I enough to be writing with authority on this topic? Or, and so that was something that we've all kind of had some healing with through this process. Like, yes, we are enough. We've had these experiences that are worth sharing, and that people will want to read about. So that was something interesting we come across.
And again, I think that everything that we're talking about in terms of the outdoor space is about belonging, and how we see ourselves and how we arrive and be our complete selves in these spaces. And I think ultimately, we can hopefully let everyone know that whomever they are, they can't be anything other than that, so
Yeah.
that has to be enough. Do you find though that we can also have what could be described as pure adventure, and does that give us the ability to perhaps give ourselves the ability to be or do things that are even more challenging, and perhaps even more out there and adventurous, simply because we're giving ourselves permission to?
Yeah, for sure. I kind of discussed that in my piece in Evolving Adventure. I, had some experiences in nature growing up, but nothing involving more than like tennis shoes or something someone would consider extreme. And then in undergrad, during my sophomore year, I went on my first camping trip. And then from there, started to feel more and more comfortable with as more people introduced me to new activities, and kept allowing myself to do more and more challenging things, and just saying, yeah, I'm going to try this. I belong here. I can do this. And just gaining that confidence and having some really wonderful adventures because of that. So I hope to give other people the space to do that.
Well, I mean, I asked that question of you specifically because I know that was a big part of your narrative overall. And just on a personal note, I'm curious to know, who are your heroes and who are your mentors?
I mean, I feel like this is going to be a bit cliche, but when I say all of the contributors of the book are really folks that I look up to and people that I have learned from and have helped mentor me in some way, I'm really, really not kidding. It has been truly incredible how much growth I've had over putting this book together over the past few years, and how, people from all different phases in their career and in life, that there's something to learn from everyone, whether it's a high schooler, undergrad, someone who's towards the end of their career. I think it's important to listen to all these different voices, and that would be my answer.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
of course,
Well, again,
you and Carolyn as well. I've really appreciated your both of your books and many writings over the years. So thank you for that. The Adventure Gap and Black Spaces, White Spaces are both books that I truly, truly loved. So.
Well, no, I appreciate that, and I'm sure I see Carolyn just put up a heart emoji. Because truthfully, I think she and I both wrote our. I mean, it's funny. Both of our books are celebrating their 10-year anniversary next year.
Oh, wow.
And so between the two of us, we, wrote the books that we had never read before or that we wanted to read, and I'm grateful that you know people like you are not only encouraged in your own life to have the outdoor experiences, but you're encouraging other people to not only have experiences, but to share their experiences through story. And truthfully, that is how we move the needle on all of this. And I think that what we can ultimately do, hopefully, is to really kind of expand this whole narrative, so that it is indeed more inclusive of more people. And when I think about the work that Carolyn has done, and people like Drew Lanham and Lorette Savoy and Rue Mapp and dozens of other people of our generation, I'm really grateful that people like you are coming along to help encourage that next generation of young people. What do you look forward to in the future for yourself? I mean, where do you see your work as an editor, as a scientist, as an outdoors person? Where do you see this future taking you?
That's a really good question, and something that I think about a lot. And I'm definitely open to many different paths, but I would love to continue with storytelling in some capacity. I would love to continue connecting with folks, getting kids outside. So a portion of the proceeds of the book go to the Humble Hustle Company. This is a nonprofit, and one of their programs, which I've worked the most with, is their Humble Hikes program, which gets Black youth from Roanoke, Virginia outside. And that's just been really incredible to see folks who have, kids who have never gone on hikes before, and just how it builds their confidence and how happy they are to be outside. And it's really been wonderful. And so I'd love to continue to do things like that, get more folks involved in research. My ideal position would be something that's interdisciplinary, where I could do a little bit of everything, some outreach, some research, some community building, storytelling. So that's my plan. I'll keep seeking out these opportunities, and who knows, maybe there'll be a Been Outside Part 2.
Well, I hope so. And frankly, I think we can look forward to a lot of really great news stories to come out of your work and all of the authors that are included in this wonderful anthology. So I wish you luck, and I hope that things continue to go well. I want to make sure that we encourage everyone to find those compelling stories that are out there, and we're seeing more and more of them all the time. And everyone who has not done the reading, but I definitely want to recommend that you do, Been Outside: Adventures of Black Women, Non-Binary, and Gender Nonconforming People in Nature, edited by our guest this evening, Amber Wendler and Shaz Zamore. Thank you, everyone, for coming out this evening. I apologize for the technical difficulties, but those are the things that happen in the modern world. But I want to also let everyone know that author discussions on the Joy Trip Reading Project are made possible thanks to the support of the Schleck Family Foundation, the National Geographic Society, and the National Park Service, in partnership with Together Outdoors and the University of Wisconsin-Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies. I want to hopefully have a new title to discuss next month, but because it's the holidays, it's always hard to get people nailed down, but we'll definitely be enjoying a new season of books and titles and authors in the new year in 2024. So I want to encourage you to all to continue to keep reading, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks for being with you, and have a lovely evening. Good night.
Thank you so much.